All right, it is 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started here. I'd like to first thank everyone for joining our topic today in our Tag Inspector webinar series. This is one of our more educational type webinars where we'll be going through the tag management journey. So what this is, the mental framework to think about as you're going through any sort of a tag management initiative or tag management process, from the initial laying out of goals all the way through your audit, inventory, testing, architecture, implementation, monitoring, the whole nine. So we want to walk through just the mental framework and the different steps in that process and how we can go about each one. To start, though, just some general housekeeping items, obviously just about us and myself. Webinar is brought to you by Tag Inspector. I am Lucas. I am the Tag Inspector Product Manager and also do tag management type consulting work for both Tag Inspector as well as our company InfoTrust. As many of you are aware, Tag Inspector is a product of InfoTrust. On the InfoTrust side of the house, we do web analytics consulting work as well as tag management, product development. We work with thousands of sites on an annual basis and do a number of educational type opportunities with these Tag Inspector webinar series being a part of that. So just to quickly run through an overview of what we'll be covering. So like I mentioned before, the tag management journey. So what exactly that journey is, what are the steps as we go through that, and just a mental framework for how to think about any sort of a new tag implementation, cleanup, audit type process. So in terms of the stages, we'll be looking at the first step, which would be goals and needs assessment. So identifying what your goals are, why exactly you are undertaking the current initiative around tags, implementation, testing, whatever it may be. Moving from that, once you've defined your goals, moving into the tag audit phase. So really getting a good understanding of what is going on your website, in your environment now. So what are the platforms? What are the data points that are being collected? How exactly are those different tags, those different pixels loading? What are they interacting with? And how are they performing on the website? Are they potentially having any sort of an effect on page performance or user experience? So we'll go through the tag audit process, what the key pieces are there, and how to structure that entire effort. We'll then go through the tag policy, which is defining your standards, both for what's allowed on the site, as well as for how those things that are allowed, how should they be behaving, and what standards should they be working within, from performance, data collection, privacy, governance, that sort of perspective. We'll then get into the architecture, which is more of the low level. How exactly should these tags be working? Architecting how everything is deployed and implemented on the website. And as well as part of this, that data layer architecture. So all the different data points that are being surfaced and what structure, where, and then how are those different things being referenced by the different platforms on your site. We'll then get into the action loop, which is what we'll call it. And this is the ongoing process. So you have implementation or adjustment, you have validation, testing, and then monitoring and alerting. So on the tail end, actually going through and doing the things that you're laying out in those previous steps, but then putting in a process in place in order to be able to monitor the effectiveness and the actual deployment and function of the different tags on that ongoing basis. Constantly just being more proactive when it comes to identifying any sorts of issues and being able to address and fix anything that arises. At the end, we'll go through just a couple different case examples. So it might be a situation that you're looking at. So an initiative that you're about to be working on or working through right now for why you would be going through this journey. We'll touch on a few of those use cases and how exactly you would walk through the steps. And then at the end, as always, do a quick little summary and answer any questions. As we go through this, if you have any questions that come up, feel free, please drop them into the questions pane. You should have a little GoToWebinar questions area where you can drop those in. I'm happy to answer those throughout. as those come up, if you need further clarification on any point, please just ask and we can dig a little bit deeper where needed. All right, so to start the journey, just a little bit of a map for where we're going to be going. So step one in our tag management process here is defining the goals. So knowing what your company wants to track, what they want to do, why are you going to be going through these different stages? Is the initiative related to performance? Maybe you're trying to optimize performance on the website, starting to identify, hey, tags might be causing some issues there as well. Maybe the initiative is more so around privacy and governance. So wanting to make sure that the platforms on your sites are compliant with the regulations of your particular industry or your area or region, and wanting to audit and fix any sorts of issues there or remove unauthorized or non-compliant tags and pixels from your website. Maybe your effort is more of an implementation of a new analytics platform, so needing to go through and work through those different data requirements and the different platforms that are there now, and how can we optimize the data capture across whatever platform it is that you are implementing. Or maybe it's just a migration, a tag management system migration. No matter what the initiative is or why you're going to be going through any sort of a major project related to tags, we need to define those things because whatever it is that you're going to be working on is going to dictate different information that we're going to capture and how we're going to structure our activity in these different steps throughout. Step two there is the tag audit, where we'll actually go through, take inventory of the tag landscape, understand what it is that's on the website now, how these different things are working, what data is being collected, where different things are, and really just putting together that documentation of everything that is happening right now. Step three is defining our tag policy. This is a little bit more high level, just defining what are the platforms that should be on the site, what shouldn't be on the site, and then how should everything that is allowed actually be behaving, what standards are there around the tags, maybe it's performance, latency, number of hits, size of tags, could be a number of different things that are going to go into that policy, but we're defining the standards. What is expected on the website? What is expected of the different tags? Step four here is the architecture, where we will take that policy and get much more granular. So looking at the different allowed and required tags, what are the data points? What interactions will they be tracking? What context to those interactions do we need to include and also collect for these different platforms? And then how are we going to surface those data points? So really mapping out that data layer, identifying how these different tags should be loaded, what should be managed and what can be managed within the tag management system versus what needs to be managed directly from the source or managed through some other container that might be present on the website. Steps 5, 6, and 7 are that action loop. So we have the adjustments or your implementation, the validation, and your testing, and then the monitoring and alerting. And again, that is ongoing because if one thing is true of business, something is always changing, especially with your website. There might be a new redesign or some new functionality that's being introduced on the website. And all of those different things can and will have some impact on the tagging and on that architecture. We need to be able to be proactive and monitor for exactly when any sort of issues arise. And then we can go through that loop for actually fixing, testing, and then monitoring again. So the end goal of this, why do we want to create this framework and walk you through this framework? Really, number one there is the tag management bliss. We want everything clean, we want everything working, and if anything stops working, which inevitably something will, we want you to be able to identify that issue and be able to go in, fix it quickly before there are major implications in the data collection or in reporting. All too often, we'll have clients in their current situation when we're first starting to work with them. What really drove you to need to audit this particular platform? Well, the data doesn't feel right. We pulled reporting for last month and we're missing multiple days of information, or the discrepancy with our backend e-commerce system and our web analytics platform, we're looking at 30-40% for revenue. Too much. It makes the data and all the efforts that you're doing in terms of tracking, monitoring, marketing technology on the website kind of worthless, because you're putting in time, you're putting in effort, you're putting in money into these platforms, but the outputs aren't trusted. And that really comes down to that tag architecture and having a solid base for data collection. A number of different initiatives which I had touched on for why we might be going through this: TMS migration, new platforms, optimizations, governance. But the goal here is we want central management of all of our tags. We want central management of all that data collection. And then we also want to have, at the end of this, a defined tag policy guidelines, a process for any sort of new implementation or new initiatives that we're going to be walking through, and then also that proactive monitoring. So we can be more proactive in addressing any issues that arise, as opposed to being reactive and having to fix things once they're already broken. So getting into these different steps, and I'm going to go a little bit more high level with these different things. We will have separate webinars for each of these steps where we'll really do a deep dive. We'll also have some additional content coming out around each of these different steps on the Tag Inspector blog and website here soon. So be on the lookout for that. But I want to introduce these different concepts here today. So number one, goals and needs assessment. So what is this? The number one question that we need to be asking and we need to understand is, why are we taking up this initiative? What is the purpose? There's money being invested in some platform or money being invested in some team for a project around the tags. Why? Is our concern in the privacy space? Are we concerned about with some new regulation or with the current regulation in our industry or in our region? And we're concerned that maybe platforms are non-compliant, which is going to cause us legal issues. If that's the case, then as we go through this, we need to have that perspective in mind as we're collecting information and understanding what's going on the website. Is the initiative more performance related, where we're going to be looking at more technical performance of tags? So again, size of requests, number of requests, tag latency, how long are we waiting for those different requests and responses from our different tags? Again, that's going to dictate what information we're looking at and what we're architecting. Is the initiative more data collection centered? Is it for a new analytics platform implementation? Is it for a new tag management system? We need to migrate different tags, so we need to standardize the structure for data collection. Depending upon the initiative is going to depend upon who we're going to be working with as walking through these steps. So obviously different teams are affected. It's also going to affect the information that we're going to need to collect in the audit stage, what exactly we will be defining in the policy stage, as well as then outlining and putting together it when it comes to the architecture, and then also the implementation testing and everything down the line. We have to understand why before we go lay out exactly how and what we're going to be doing. Some other pieces with the goals and the needs assessment: we need to understand at a high level our current state. So what do we know and what do we not know? Do we even know all the different tags and platforms that are on our site? That's a good place to start. If not, then okay, we need to go in with a little bit more of a blank slate. If we know what's there and we have some standards, we have some requirements, at least for some of the tags, we have something to compare against. So we need to know, what do we know? What do we not know? What do we want to and need to be able to understand? And then also the business requirements and standards. These are going to dictate, one, just the initiative in general and the direction of where we're going, but also the standards to which we're going to need to create these different pieces of documentation and the standards moving forward. The final piece here in the goals and needs assessment, who owns this process, who will own the management of the tags and the platforms moving forward, and who needs to be involved in this process. One thing that will become very apparent, especially as we get into the tag audit stage, the different business teams are going to be involved. The people that are using the outputs of these different platforms and using reporting, or the media team who might be relying on some of the campaign information that we're collecting from our tags, they're going to need to be involved in the process so we can understand what should be on the site and what are the requirements for those different things. It's best to map out this entire web of who needs to be involved up front. Makes it so much more easier as we move forward. So once we've defined our goals, once we really understand what it is that we're going to be needing to collect, we can now get into the tag audit stage. And now with the tag audit, the big thing here is, it has its own unique slide. We have to have a goal. And again, that's why we start with goals in step one, but I cannot reiterate this enough. We have a lot of people that will come to us and say, hey, tag inspector guys, I know your tool can collect a lot of information about tags. You work with tags all the time. We need to do an audit. I want to understand everything that's on the website. I need to know every platform. I need to know every piece of data collected. I need to know every single interaction that is tracked. And going back to that goal stage, the first thing I'll ask is why? What are you going to be doing with this information? Are you having issues or difficulties with certain platforms? Are you having gaps in reporting? Are you having issues maybe with performance? Because again, if we just collect everything, which you can in theory do, all you're going to be left with is just a ton of raw data that you're still going to have to swim through. And it's not actionable in order to be able to put together any sort of documentation or to even determine what the next steps are moving forward. So we need to know the goal. Why are we collecting this information? Why are we auditing? What is it that we need to understand? And then we can take a deep dive into the specifics around that end goal. So with the tag audit, the purpose and our requirements of the audit. Number one, like I mentioned, assessing the current landscape. Things that we need to know and need to have as an outcome of this audit. We need to understand what tags are present on my website. What are the platforms that are loading? Where are they loading? Are they on every single page? Do I have certain things only on loading on some interactions, or only on landing pages, or only on e-commerce type listing pages? I need to know where these different platforms are and then how each one is getting there. Is it something that's loading directly from the page source? Is it maybe already loading from my tag management system? Or is it loading from some legacy tag management system? Or lastly, is it maybe piggybacking or loading through some other tag or some other platform on the site? So number one is understand just what's there, how they're behaving. Number two then, and we'll get into more deeper granularity, is with tag context. So specifically for each of those platforms, and this is where it helps to define the goals, because if we're collecting all this information, it's a lot. But if we have a specific goal, we're trying to optimize performance of the website, we're going to want to grab performance information, latency of my tags. At what point during page load are my tags loading? Is it late enough that there's no way it's affecting user experience or the load of the content of my page? Are there tags that are maybe blocking the functionality and the load of other tags or the content of my page? Those are the types of contextual information that we can grab about tags around performance. We're also going to know data collected. So if we are doing an in-depth audit of, say, our Google Analytics implementation, because we have some crazy disparity between the back-end e-commerce system and what we're seeing in Google Analytics, we need to understand what data is collected, what is the configuration of the tags, and then what is actually working when it comes to those technical specifics and being collected on the website. We also need to know the deployment method, which, like I mentioned before, goes into how these tags are loading. So how is each instance of a tag loading? Is it always loading from the page source? Is it sometimes tag management system, sometimes page source, on some pages both? Need to understand that for each of the individual tags. It's important to note here, and as the theme, I guess, when I was going through what we need to know, high level, everything on the site, down to the low level of individual tags, it is a multi-phase approach. We go from high to low, and when we drill down deeper, we want to be grabbing all that information specific to our goal. We need to be able to manage the resources of the team, time that it's taking, cost that it's taking in order to be able to collect this information. So we do start at that high level and then narrow down as necessary. When I talk about that high level, I'm mostly referring to just a general tag inventory. And this is a quick screenshot of just a high level tag inventory. We'll break down what are the different tags that are on the site, a little bit of context just around category, subcategories. So what do these platforms do? What's their purpose? We then have the initiating tag or the initiating location. So is it loading from the source through our tag management system, piggybacking, and then where are these tags? This is an output from data collected with the tag inspector scans. So you have pages scans, pages containing, start to see the prevalence and how widely dispersed some of these different platforms are on the website. Some additional business information that's also very helpful, even as you're going through this audit stage, is being able to identify for each of the different platforms, who is the business owner? Is it maybe requested, or is that platform or tag managed by an agency partner? The more we can know not only about the technical aspects of the tags, but also about who owns it, what is its purpose, who's using it on a day-to-day basis, it's going to make it so much easier when we get into the policy and we get into the architecture and the actual implementation phases, because we know who knows what should be happening for these different platforms. We know who would be working in them and can tell us if things are necessary, not necessary, and what their standard or what their requirement is for that platform. So we need to also know some of those business requirements and needs for each of these. No better time than during the audit to actually capture that. This again is just a look from a tag inspector scan report for kind of what can go into that inventory. Again, a list of the different tags that are loading on a website, and then an understanding of exactly how. What is the relationship between the different tags? That's that high level. When we start with the inventory, just knowing the overall landscape, the overall picture. As we then start digging in at the lower level for the tag data, the information that I'm referring to. So your business context. One, again, capturing that business information. So from the actual team using the platform. How is the platform used? What type of information is being collected? Is it an analytics platform where we're needing to capture all kinds of user behavior on the site? Is it maybe a tool just for A/B testing? And that's the purpose of it. Is it a tool, maybe our DMP? So we're trying to just be able to cookie a lot of users so that we can match it with a third-party cookie pool for media purposes down the road. Is it retargeting, where we need to be capturing or where it should be capturing certain bits of information and only be deployed on, say, our product list pages and in our conversion funnel? That business context, knowing what should be happening for these different tags, is crucial. So who owns and who uses it? How is the platform used? And then why is it on the site? One thing that we'll get into with the actual policy is defining what should and should not be on the site, so we can remove it. Well, it helps to understand, now that you have, because you've done the inventory, now that you have a list of the different tags and platforms present, if no one owns it and no one's using it, that's going to be a very good candidate for removal as we get into the policy and architecture. Again, also talking about specifics for the technical tag data, so performance information, tag latency, number of requests, size of request, is it a blocking tag, where is it being initiated in the waterfall of the overall page load, on what timing event, what tags load before it, after it, all that type of information. Data that's being collected, is it all product context information? Is it transaction information? What's being collected? User information. Ideally, we would have a standard against which to compare what is actually being collected versus what should be. So we can have that gap analysis against the requirements coming out of the audit. Having that is awesome. And for many platforms, you may. For many platforms, you would probably already have like an analytics architecture or like a solution design type of document. Super helpful there. And then we also want to know that technical tag information for how a tag is loading. So is it from the source through a tag management system or piggybacking? Here's an example when we're talking about the technical requirements. So for a specific tag, in this case, Google Universal Analytics, having the requirements for what should be being collected, all the different fields, and then as we're going through the audit and we're looking at what actually is, being able to compare what should be and actually happening. So again, have that gap analysis so we can highlight these are the issues. This is what's not working. And then as we get into that architecture, start figuring out, why, and then what exactly it is that we need to build into our website or into the data layer or into our architecture to get these different aspects working. So coming out of the audit, again, we have the high-level inventory. So we have an understanding of what tags, what platforms, what pixels are loading on the website, where exactly they are, and then how they're getting there, how they're being initiated. More specifically, for each of those tags, we're going to have a good understanding in the context, again, of why we're going through this. We're going to have a good understanding of, what does the performance look like for this tag? Or what is the data being captured? What type of information is being captured by this tag for compliance? Is it setting cookies for privacy? Is all data that should be captured, what data is being captured, what interactions are being tracked for some of those more analytics type of related use cases or implementations. So coming out of the audit, we have a really good understanding of what's happening now. We now need to get into the tag policy standpoint. Now, the tag policy stage is more around the high-level definitions for our standards. Okay, we'll get into the more granular requirements for like data being captured and a little bit more in the architecture. But at a high level, our tag policy, we need to define what is allowed, what is not allowed, and what is required. Now, this goes initially just in terms of what platforms can, can't, and have to be on my website. But then also for all of those that are allowed and required, what is the loading behavior? How should it be initiated from the page source through the tag management system? Is it okay to be piggybacked on off of a certain platform? Because we know that's, we have a data sharing agreement in place and we know exactly how that information is being used versus is for a particular tag, is it not allowed to be loading in a certain way on the site, while it is allowed to be loading in some other way? We need to define that. We need to say what should be happening. The tag requirements, again, this is a little bit more specific for each of those platforms. what information, what pages should it be on, what data should be being collected, what interactions should be being tracked. And then also some tag standards, just general, around performance. So what is the maximum latency figure that a tag is allowed to have? What are some overall like page weight or page size guidelines that we need to stay under? And what portion of that is allowed to be taken up by these JavaScript tags and scripts loading on the website? Privacy and compliance, what are our standards there? So for certain types of users, or for users accessing the site in certain regions or different countries or different sections of the site, what tags are allowed to be loaded and what data is allowed to be captured there. We also need to be creating some standards around not just the tags on the website now, but also some standards around our implementation process. So what does, if a new tag, a new platform needs to be added to the site, what does that actual process look like? What does the request look like? Who handles and manages that? Who configures the tag? Are there any standards around that configuration? If a platform is asking for something that we don't have yet in our architecture, how do we go about adding that request for a new data point to be surfaced in our data layer? What does that process look like? And then finally, standards around ownership. Who owns the implementation? Who owns the tag management system? Who owns the different platforms? So if an issue does arise or a change is necessary, we know exactly who to contact. All of this gets wrapped up in that tag policy. So here's just an example. I know many of you have probably seen this. I share it quite a bit, but from a request document. So you have the input for what is being requested. This is more business, high-level business information, the life cycle from to business description of the platform, who owns it, what is the name. Again, so we know who to track down, and also so we know the life cycle of the tags. And that's an important point that I think gets missed a lot, is we need to put an expiration date, quote unquote, on the deployment of tags. Too often, especially as we go through that audit and inventory process, we'll identify and find tags that are no longer in use. No one's using that platform. Oh yeah, that was something that someone in marketing 2 years ago was piloting. We didn't end up even signing a contract with them, but their tag and their JavaScript is still on the website. Even if that particular company isn't, ingesting or using or selling the information gathered, it's still additional weight to the page. It's still, a file that has to load, processing that has to take browser resources that are being utilized in order to send those requests, receive the response, and then run any scripts on the website. It's just not necessary. So in order to be able to curb and make sure that those sorts of instances don't happen, we need to have an expiration date. We need to have a life cycle. We also need to have, for like that implementation process, it helps to go ahead and collect the information similarly to how we would be doing it in an audit, but so we can be more proactive. And as more tags are added, as more pixels are added to the website and things change, we can always have documentation. And that's where something like this comes in, where we're putting the actual script, putting the required URLs, all those requirements that we talked about as we're defining the tag policy. Go ahead and get that information as a part of any sort of request for a new platform to be added on the website. So at this stage in our process and in our journey, we've defined the goals. We have a really good understanding of what's happening on the website now. And we have our policy defined. So we know what should be. We know what is happening. We know what should be happening. And we know why we're doing all this. Now we get into the tag and just the general architecture stage. Now in the architecture stage, we're talking about the technical setup of the site and then also of tags. So primarily this is going to be focused on your tag management system, the data layer, and how we're ingesting and surfacing all the different data points that are going to need to be utilized by the different tracking technologies and marketing tools on the website. And then also an outline of our events and data requirements. So the context. So what user actions on the website need to be tracked, and what do we want to learn from those? Everything that you will need in this, we're going to already have. We just need to organize it and then figure out the most efficient and most effective way of architecting it and then deploying it on the website. And when I say that you're already going to have the requirements, that's because we already know what the requirements are for the business. We already know what our standards are for data being collected, for what platforms are there. And then for those that are allowed and required, again, we already know what the requirements are for those. So we know what interactions analytics and the analytics team wants to track. We know what pages and what actions our remarketing platform is needing to track. We've compiled all that. So at this architecture stage, we're combining it together, and then we're architecting out the data layer. So how those different points are surfaced so that we have a central place to reference for all of these different tags. And then also how everything is configured in our tag management system, what needs to go in there, and then how these different tags and different platforms are being loaded. So here we're mapping out just what everything looks like. We need to build that foundation. A very important point here with architecture, we need thorough documentation. So we might know, this is just an example of what a data layer output might look like when we're looking at it within our development tools, our console. But we need to know, prior to actually getting this set up, we need to know the standard. So we need to know the structure of our data layer. Is there anything, this example here, I like using it because it has our Google Analytics enhanced e-commerce. In order for the tag to ingest this information automatically, the data has to be in a certain structure within that data layer. Same thing's going to be true potentially for other platforms. Now we can customize a lot of this based upon the tag configuration. But if we can make it easier, and again, like I mentioned before, efficiency. If we make it more efficient, what is the most efficient way to make this information available so that these different snippets of JavaScript can do as little processing as they need to do on the website? And we can load in as little custom JavaScript from our tag management system as we have to on the website. In addition to this, and this is just an example for individual tag requirements, needing to be able to check both what we have architected and laid out in our data layer, and make sure that all of the requirements that are being dictated by the different tags and platforms, all of those requirements are present in our new data layer architecture. I tell people all the time, and it's true, about 90% of what you're going to need in your data layer is going to be, and even 90% of interactions and events that are being tracked is going to be dictated by the analytics group, the analytics team. It'd be Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, IBM Core Metrics, whatever it is that you're using, those are always what I like to call the neediest of all tags. It's tracking the most because it's tracking all that user behavior on the website. So the requirements there and your other third-party tags and third-party platforms, you're just kind of building on top of that. So once we have that architecture, once we have everything documented out, we understand what's on the site now, we understand what the requirements are, we understand what everything should be looking like in order and how everything will be configured in order for everything to work moving forward. We now get to this action loop stage, which within this action loop, we're going to have implementation or adjustments. We're going to have validation and testing, and then we're going to have alerting and monitoring. So in the implementation, or in that graphic there, you see it as the adjust stage. This is where we're actually going to be setting up and configuring and taking our architecture documents and how everything is laid out and putting it into practice. So configuration of your tag management system, setting up and moving all the different tags that maybe were previously loading from your page source to now be loading within that tag management system, making sure that your TMS is in fact deployed across every single page. Also making sure that configuration of variables, triggers, or firing rules, or macros are all properly set up within that tag management system. We're also talking about implementation or adjustments of any tags. Like I mentioned before, if it's an implementation of a new platform, then it's full configuration of that tag and that JavaScript. If we're just needing to fix and address some sort of discrepancy between our analytics platform and our backend e-commerce system, it might be an adjustment. We need to take that gap analysis that we did as part of the audit and then just make the changes. It's also the data layer configuration and the coding, so we can push and surface all the information that is necessary in the proper format to the data layer, and then as well as removal of any sort of unapproved tags, just flat out removal, or removal of tags from the page source so they can be migrated to our tag management system. Stage 2 here is validation, so testing and QA. We've done the work, we've done the implementation, we need to make sure everything is actually functioning as we expect it to. And this encompasses both data layer as well as tag testing. One thing I always harp on when it comes to the data layer and tags and their relationship is the data has to be available. It has to be surfaced by the time a tag executes in order for it to be collected and sent up to the respective server and respective platform. So first, we need to test and ensure that our data layer is in the structure that it should be, as well as the different data points are surfaced and available and in the right format that they should be. We then need to make sure that our tags are, one, just firing, so making sure that they're executing. That's a great start. And then making sure the data is being collected in the structure and in the format that it is being expected. No errors are being kicked. No other tags and performance issues are potentially causing issues with data being collected. And then also that all the data points are in the proper format so they can be ingested at processing by the respective platform. And then the last part of testing here is for different events and interactions. So as users are going through and doing different things on the website, making sure that those data layer pushes are happening, tags are executing when those interactions are happening, and the contextual data that you're wanting to collect across the different tags and different platforms on your website, making sure that that is also included in those events and interaction pushes to your data layer and requests sent by the tags. Final stage of this action loop is the alerting and the monitoring. So this is just an ongoing process for automated QA. All too often right now, sites, companies are way too reactive in their approach to monitoring. We don't know, or most people don't know that there's an issue until a critical report doesn't have the information that it needs, or until the media team can't actually evaluate the effectiveness of a particular campaign because their floodlight tags were actually never executing where they're supposed to be. Or until we're misled about what the proper next step is or proper action to take is in a particular marketing campaign or in a marketing initiative because our tags and the data that's collected is wrong due to that poor architecture. So how can we be proactive with this? I mean, everything was working right after we tested it, right? We need an ongoing process for monitoring, and doing regular auditing is not the answer. It's just too much of a time-intensive process. So we need to have those standards that we define in our policy, and we need to just have an automated way of constantly ongoing checking those different aspects. Now, this can be done obviously manual if you have a team, but it can also be automated with tools such as our tag inspector. So even things as high level as what tags are allowed, required, not allowed, defining that in a tag policy, being alerted to any of those issues, as well as more granular pieces such as data that's being collected by a particular tag. So defining those data collection requirements, and letting us monitor that on an ongoing basis. So the end result of an active ongoing monitoring process is going to be alerts. And one thing that's often forgot is when we get alerts, we still need a process and we still need people in place to be able to take action on those. Being alerted is great, but if we're just alerted and we're just aware of a bunch of issues, but we have no mechanism for actually addressing them, it's only causing us more anxiety. And that underscores and underlines the importance of going back to our tag policy definitions, of defining those different processes, who owns this process, and then having complete and having accurate documentation for each of the tags, for our architecture, so we know we can remediate any issues because we know what it should look like. And with a very robust monitoring process, we know constantly what it does look like, so we can fix those issues rather quickly. Important to note with the journey, and that's all the different steps, like I mentioned, hitting on those at a high level, but it's important to note that the process is ongoing. One, obviously our action loop, when we're alerted to an issue, going through and adjusting, fixing any issues, testing those, and then going back into the monitoring phase. But also ongoing in the sense that any major tag initiative should follow this same process. And we need to apply the same mental framework to addressing any of those issues. Be it a performance initiative around tags. Still needs to, we defined our goal. We still need to audit for performance specifically, define our performance policy, architect what this is going to look like, what adjustments need to be made in our current deployment, and then the action. Or even if it is a privacy or governance sort of initiative, we've defined our goal. We need to audit, see what is non-compliant as we have it defined, go back and refine our tag policy in order to be able to get it up to standards, architect what changes need to be made, what it'll look like at the end of the process, then the action loop. I think you get the point there, but we always want to follow the same path and the same journey. And that is, a general overview of that path, the mental framework and how we want to attack and how we want to walk through any sort of a major tag type implementation or major tag initiative. For some, current situation might be, my stuff's a complete mess. So we need to tackle all of these different aspects. For others, we might feel really good about certain pieces of it, but we need to address others individually. As long as we keep the same process in mind, as long as we walk through each of these steps, we're always going to come out with clean implementation on the back end and process and knowledge of exactly how we're going to fix any issues moving forward. So at this time, if there are any questions, happy to answer them. As I wait for any of those. Also, one important note, we are doing, like I mentioned at the very beginning, just to reiterate, a little bit of a series for these different aspects. So we'll be digging deeper into the audits, the policy, the architecture, as well as implementation, testing, and monitoring, both in the context of what that documentation can look like, what the process can look like, as well as how, in some of our training webinars, Tag Inspector can help with each of those different aspects. So be on the lookout for those. And it doesn't look like I have any questions, which is fine. If anything does come up, as always, please don't hesitate to reach out. Let me know. Happy to help out with any of these different pieces that you might be going through. And until then, be on the lookout for that additional content around each of these different stages. And we'll look forward to hopefully having you join us on another webinar in the future. Thank you all very much.